One night as I lay on my bed, and sleep on fleeting-footed fled, because, no doubt, my mind was heavy with concern for my last journey. I got me up and called for water, that I might wash, and so feel better. But before I wet my eyes so dim, there was death on the bowl's rim. I went to church, that I might pray, thinking sure he'd keep away. But before I got onto my feet, there sat death upon my seat. To my chamber then I hied, thinking sure he'd keep outside. But though I firmly locked the door, death came from underneath the floor. Then to sea I rowed a boat, thinking sure death can't float. But before I reached the deep, death was captain of the ship. The poem Death was originally a Welsh ballad. The song was translated from the Welsh by Inerant Alphen Davies. Welsh songs and poetry often deal with themes of death and doom. This song speaks of an old human fear, the fear of death. The narrative form is used to tell a story that is somewhat amusing and somewhat frightening. The poem is a ballad. The ballad is a narrative poem meant to be sung. The poem is written in 5 quatrains. Since it is written as a song, pair rhyme is used throughout the poem. The poet uses a first-person narrative to give us a first-hand glance of his thoughts. The poem is light-hearted, but still teaches a lesson. Man should not worry about dying, or try to avoid it, but rather concentrate on living life to the full and enjoy every moment. Death is inevitable. One cannot escape death. The poet might be old and has started to think about his own death, my last journey. Euphemism is used because the topic is taboo and softer words are normally used when referring to death. The poet tries to avoid thinking about death, but the thought stays with him and he cannot escape it. Thoughts of death follow him at home in bed, while washing up, in church praying, in the privacy of his inner sanctum, and even out to sea. Death is a simple poem addressing a dreaded and taboo subject, death. This was originally a Welsh ballad. Welsh folk songs and poetry often deal with themes of death and doom. Death is personified and seems to follow the poet everywhere. The tone of the speaker changes as the poem progresses. In stanza 1 the tone is slightly depressed but calm, his spirits are weighed down by his fears. In stanzas 2 to 4, a tone of disbelief and uncertainty becomes evident, thinking sure, and then growing desperation, my chamber I hid. But in the last line of the poem, the tone turns to one of resignation. He now knows and is forced to accept the truth. In stanza 1 the speaker describes how he is lying tossing and turning, unable to sleep. His sleep is light and his mind is heavy. It is night and dark. At night our deepest fears surface. Night is a symbol of fear, darkness. Things always seem scarier at night. The alliteration of the soft thieves sound emphasizes how softly and quickly sleep disappears. Sleep is fleeting from the poet. Sleep cannot flee since it is not a living thing. Consequently, an example of personification. Sleep is compared to a person who left in a hurry. He is wide awake. Because indicates that a reason will follow for the lost sleep. No doubt is written between 2 commas to emphasize the fact that there is absolutely no doubt. The speaker knows without a doubt the reason for his sleeplessness. His mind was heavy and his thoughts are consumed by the fear of dying. Euphemism is used to soften the tone of the poem. Last journey is a more acceptable way of saying death, which is maybe too harsh. Death is described as the final journey of the man's life. This metaphor creates a visual representation of his fear of death. The fact that it is the last journey scares him. The speaker is tossing and turning, without a doubt, he is scared of dying. He is so afraid that he is too scared to mention it directly. In stanza 2 he wanted to wash his face and death was sitting on the edge of the basin. He quickly got out of bed and he called for water to wash his face to see if he can wash away some of his worries. It says that he called for water, so one can assume someone had to bring him water. The word but indicates a change in the tone and content. His eyes are dim. They look lifeless because of sleepless nights. Death is written with a capital letter. This makes a proper noun. Death is now a name. Death is personified throughout the poem and is everywhere. Death was sitting on the edge of the basin. Death is still with him. In stanza 3 the poet went to pray to ask God to protect him, but death was waiting for him. The church is supposed to be a safe place, a sanctuary where you communicate with God. He thinks that death will not bother him while he is talking to God. The speaker is trying to get away from death. But death was sitting on his seat. The word but again indicates a change in tone. It indicates that his plan was foiled. Death is still with him. He is being singled out, where he goes, death goes. The word thinking is repeated 3 times in the poem. In lines 10, 14, and 18. The word emphasizes the poet's futile attempts to gain control of the situation. The personification continues. Death written with a capital letter. Death is personified throughout the poem and is everywhere like a shadow. In stanza 4 he went to hide in his room, but death came from underneath the floor. There is no escaping death. His chamber is his bedroom and is usually a safe space. His inner sanctum was breached by the unwelcome visitor. The archaic word hide is used. Hide is to hurry. This could indicate that the speaker is old. He is getting more anxious. Thinking is repeated for the second time. Again, his plan is foiled. He thinks the death will respect his privacy. He locks his door, he tries his best, does anything in his power to keep death out. Death entered, nevertheless. You cannot keep death out because death can do the impossible. Death is an integral part of life. The speaker is anxious, running away from death. He hurries to his bedroom which he regards as a safe space, but death crawls underneath the floor as it has supernatural powers and is part of everyone's life. In line 17 the poet uses inversion of word order for rhyming purposes. It should have read, then I rowed a boat to sea. He tries to reassure himself that death would not be able to follow him out to sea. Deep is used as metonymy to represent the deep sea, but he did not get very far out to sea. Death is now fully personified. Death physically captains the ship. Death is fully in control, and his orders are to be followed. There is a feeling of defeat in the last stanza. He finally realizes that death has no limits and cannot be restrained or contained. With the repetition of thinking for the third time, the speaker tries to reassure himself that he is in control, but finally comes to realize that one cannot flee from death. Death is everywhere and can happen at any time. The speaker tries to convince himself that death would not be able to follow him out to deep sea, however, he did not have to go far to realize that he was wrong. The image of the ship reinforces the metaphor of a last journey used in stanza 1. Their speaker has nowhere to run and death cannot be held back. We might say the speaker is outwitted by death,